song for you, baby. Oh, fairy, in the wishing well, you left a shoe in my echo.
Well, that very artsy film was actually taken by my next guest, Gregg Millett, and he was at the press conference. And I love the fact that there's a light behind it to show that wonderful artsy feeling.
At first I was going to move, and then I thought, wait a minute, this kind of works.
It looks,
so
I really
decided
like that
to
a lot.
Stick with it.
Gregg Millett is going to China. And he's going to China because of the Flying Tigers. Now, the Flying Tigers were during World War II, and Gregg certainly wasn't there at that time, I don't think.
My dad was, though.
Your dad was.
That's my connection.
And he wasn't a Flying Tiger, though.
He was close. The thing about the Flying Tigers is they represent, for China in general and Kunming in particular, the American effort support of China in World War II. The Flying Tigers are the symbol. And if I
They
can,
love the Flying Tigers.
Yeah, and I'm really nervous being on this side of the calendar, hoping the camera, hoping Joel is doing good. And I'd like to take a look at the first slide.
Okay, we're going to take a look at the slide.
There's China, and that star in the bottom left is where I'm going. Kunming,
Okay,
at
and
the end
that
of
was-
the Burma Road.
And that's where the Flying Tigers were stationed.
Yeah,
or
they
kind
were
of-
actually based in Burma. I'll
Burma,
tell you in
okay.
a second. And the
Okay.
next slide would be...
Oh, that's right. They wouldn't have been stationed there. Right.
Well, yeah, no, they were.
Okay,
But
they were there
let's
too.
see, the next slide shows my dad, a
Okay.
U.S. Army doctor who took care of the downed pilots. That was the connection. But the reason
The
I
Doolittle
got...
Flyers.
Well, all of the flyers, all the time he was there, his hospital, yeah.
Okay.
And actually, at one of my presentations, a woman said, Dr. Millett, I knew Dr. Millett. He took care of my husband, who wasn't my husband then, but I met him in the hospital because I was a nurse.
I was there when that
I
happened.
know, wasn't
yeah,
that? It was
that
so
was up
great.
in Vermont somewhere.
So the next picture is how I got connected with China. My dad took pictures, colored photographs of China back there in his spare time, and I took them back to China and met this man, Jin Fei Bao. Let's take a look at the next slide. Next slide. And this is the exhibition he put together in 2004. Next slide, please, Joel. And this is what I was met when I arrived. And next slide. And this is the people lined up for a mile to get in and see them. And
It was a magnificent exhibition
it
of...
was Chinese.
And these pictures, you didn't really say, but these pictures were not of war. These are pictures of the people at the time.
And my dad actually took a couple pictures of the airplanes, but and a Flying Tiger airplane, but mostly he took pictures of the culture. Back to the slides. And
Okay.
the people were looking back into their past. And as it says in the credit, next please, 300,000 people came.
And they found their family relatives.
See,
in
and
this.
I know I'm going back for the Flying Tigers. Next, please. Look at that. But see, the real thing is it was the American connection with the Chinese people in that time, the war effort being symbolized by the Flying Tigers.
Right.
Now, the next slide. And now, this is what happened. Jin Fei Bao took this collection of my dad's pictures to Kunming, to the National Museum of China. This was a huge thing for him to do. And then he got some notoriety. So next slide, please, Joel.
Mm-hmm.
And so he took off and with his brother climbed Mount Everest. Then he, next slide, and then he like skied to the South Pole and then to the North Pole. And then he crossed the Sahara Desert. Next slide, so now we're back. So he became a very famous man. So when he gets an idea,
and his idea was
latest idea was to celebrate the Flying Tigers.
the
in the
70th
US.
anniversary.
Right. He calls it, it's tricky, but yes, the 70th anniversary. And the next slide. So this is, I'm going back to represent America and the Flying Tigers. And I made, next slide, and here are the slides. I'm taking some photographs back from the Aerosciences Museum. These are the originals. I believe there are 2 original Flying Tiger pilots still alive. That's their...
One is in our area.
That's their leader, the general. And this is a man in South Dakota who's a historian and an artist, draws pictures and gets stories of the pilots. He has done this for a few years. Next slide. I'm taking a few of his pictures back to give to the museum. And the next picture, this is a more current, but it's our local man, Hank Snow, who's still alive, and he he flew in 3 wars, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, and Vietnam, and he flew 666 missions. Now it was this man, Hank Snow, because this other man, John Tomlinson, who drew his plane and got his story, he emailed me and that's how I got in touch with the man in South Dakota. Now the man in South Dakota was going to go with me, Mollison, but we got the notice so late, like 7 days ago, that the funds had come through. So as you know, I got my ticket and my visa, and I'm headed tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I'm looking, see, from me, I'm going to reconnect with the people that love the photos. I'm going to have a special reception, invite everybody there. We're going to go to the Flying Tiger restaurant, but we're specifically going to celebrate the U.S. World War II effort to help China and the Flying Tigers in particular. And one of the amazing things about the Flying Tigers is by presidential order, they were funded and founded 2 months before Pearl Harbor.
But they were volunteers. That amazed me.
Well, they were
all
volunteers, but
from the military.
Yeah, but they were paid 3 times more than the average
but
military
they were still,
pilot.
but they volunteered to do the mission.
Some people call them mercenaries.
Oh.
I'm sorry, but see,
But they were still part of the military.
100 planes. No, it was secret. 100 planes.
Oh.
100 pilots, 200 ground crew in Burma. Now then the Japanese, after Pearl Harbor, took over most of Southeast Asia, including Burma, and they had to escape from the Japanese as they moved closer to China. But the real thing about the Flying Tigers is, I believe 2 or 5 days after Pearl Harbor, after the war began, the Flying Tigers were ready, they were there, then they became part of the war. And they shot down...
Was that Chennault's Raider?
Chennault's Flying Tigers. And 5 days after the war began, the Flying Tigers shot down the Japanese bombers over Kunming, and Kunming was never bombed again. See, it was bombed daily. But after the Flying Tigers, they didn't want to risk those. And the Flying Tigers weren't really as good as the Japanese planes, but Chennault had his own strategy of how to take these heavier aircraft, go real high, and dive on the bombers and shoot them down. So it's an amazing story. Then the Flying Tigers became a part of the 14th Air Force as part of the war effort, and then the history of the war is extremely complex. And a wonderful, amazing thing is that currently China, Red China, Communist China, Mao China, this was Chiang Kai-shek's China that we were involved with, have chosen to accept our effort, historically, as helping the Chinese in World War II. So I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, it's going to be you'll have stories to tell. He'll be on the show after.
Now, what's my friend Jinfei Bao doing?
I was just going to say, what's Jinfei Bao going to be doing next?
Well, since the Flying Tiger Airport in Kunming got abandoned and their brand new airport, he decided, before it's turned into shopping malls, he'd do a celebrity race in the old airport.
Are you going to be running in that?
Yes.
Walking, maybe?
Run to congratulate him for finishing.
At the end.
And then he's going to take the VIPs to the Flying Tiger restaurant, and then we're going to have a reception for people who...
Well, you're going to hear all about it when he gets back, but we might just also mention that Jinfei Bao is going to be running in the Boston Marathon, and then he's going to bike across the country, the U.S., right?
Yeah, and I'm taking a presentation to China called A Trip Across the USA, Land of Many Cultures, basically with bicycles.
He's very interested in culture.
Oh, yeah.
The cultures of all countries throughout the world.
So we start in New York and end in San Francisco, and he's going to do it with my Chinese-speaking nephew, Jesse, hopefully in July. And then he's going to come run the Boston Marathon.
Lots of good things. Then he's going to run the New York City Marathon and the Chicago Marathon.
He's a madman.
He sure is.
Yeah.
But anyway, so if you wonder who's behind the scenes doing our show, Gregg Millett is our technical director, and Joel Stewart, who is doing it right now, is the assistant director, and he's doing it quite well. Thank you, Joel.
And Dick on camera.
And Dick on camera. And
Leo
Nina. Yes, I didn't even introduce everybody
and Leo
today.
Helping with
and Leo
camera.
helping. Oh my goodness, I'm so bad.
We're your team, man.